Hello and welcome to our Care Partner training. I am Melissa Long, the Director of Education and Support at Insight Memory Care Center. Our mission is to provide specialized care, support, and education for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and other memory impairments, their families, caregivers, and the community through our Adult Day Health and Resource Center. Our vision is a community where those affected by Alzheimer's and disease and other memory impairments can achieve the highest quality of life. These Care Partner trainings are geared towards family and caregivers for loved ones at home. They are free and open to the public, and learn about our organization and find upcoming classes at insightmcc.com. I would now like to introduce Rebecca Harrison. She's going to talk to you today about caregiving and emotional roller coaster, addressing grief and loss. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you all for joining us today. I know that this is a really busy time. It's in the holiday and season and everyone is really quite busy. So I really appreciate you taking the time to click on us and join us today. Today, I'm talking about the emotional roller coaster of caregiving and the part of that of addressing the grief and loss that comes with the caregiving role and with the dementia process. We're talking today as the emotional roller coaster of dementia caregiving, and we all know that it's very stressful as a dementia caregiver. If caregivers are at risk for as a care partner for depression, we're at risk for anxiety disorders, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, medical complications such as hypertension, high blood pressure. Those and we know that being a caregiver and is incredibly stressful, and the grief and loss associated with caregiving of someone that we know and love. How does that differ? When we talk about the grief and loss associated with caregiving and the dementia process, how does the grief and loss differ from other forms of grief and loss? And what makes it more challenging for us than other losses that we've experienced in our lives? And so today, my goal is to actually provide some definition and possibly some structure around what you may be feeling as you experience the grief and loss, and also be able to provide some strategies of coping with that. So I want to talk about that. So what makes it the caregiving, the dementia, the grief and loss associated with dementia differ? There's been some research on that and describing that and understanding it. And it's due to the nature of the grief and the loss that one experiences in the dementia caregiving process. So what is the difference? Well, the definition is the difference is the type of loss that we're experiencing as caregivers and family members of someone that is struggling with dementia. And the definition is the ambiguous loss. So we're going to talk about ambiguous loss today and what that means and how that loss differs from a loss, say the death of someone that is a clear loss. So the definition of ambiguous loss would be the loss is unclear, there's no resolution, there's no predictable ending or closure, there's no clear guidelines, and the losses are vague and uncertain, and it's unlike any other style of grief. This type of grief can happen to anyone for reasons that are not always recognized. So today we're going to explore the psychological impact on caregivers due to this ambiguous loss and due to the nature of the disease process of dementia. Ambiguous loss is not a new concept in clinical practice. It's been around since the beginning of the 70s. But recently, it's come to the forefront in clinical practice because more and more people are doing more studies on ambiguous loss due to the pandemic. So we're bringing it more into counseling in the therapy room. Originally, ambiguous loss was coined by a researcher at the University of Minnesota, Pauline Boss. And Dr. Boss did studies. Her beginning research were on families of military, missing in actions, kidnapped individuals. So, and then she began, as she applied what she was learning in that capacity, she also started researching what was happening to people with another kind of loss. So Dr. Boss actually coined the word and supported the research. And today, my talk is going to be supported by Dr. Boss's research, and also the research that was done at the Cleveland Clinic. So the research information that I'm in, the research and the studies that I'm going to refer to today will be the research of Dr. Boss and also of the Cleveland Clinic. There are two types of ambiguous loss, according to Dr. Boss, and the research that supports these two types. There are two types. One is the physically absent. I'm sorry. There are two kinds: the physically present, and emotionally or cognitively absent. And that's the loss that we're going to talk about with dementia today. That's the examples of that would be dementia, brain injury, or addiction. The second type of loss is the, we need to go one back probably, but the other is the physical. It is being physically absent, such as the prisoner of war, the kidnap, or the runaway child. So those are the two examples of the ambiguous loss that came through the research done, the research supporting this new, not new, but this concept of the ambiguous loss and why that is so difficult for us. The second type of loss that's related to dementia, which is the ambiguous loss where someone is physically present and cognitively and emotionally absent. The person's thinking and their personalities are altered, and they're not the same person prior to the disease onset. And again, that would be the example of the dementia, brain injury, addiction. Ambiguous loss is grief in limbo. No death has occurred, and yet there's this persistent feeling of mourning, leaving us confused and unable to move on with our lives, feeling sad and not knowing why. And a real case example of this, I'd like to present a case example of this, and I'm going to present a couple. I'm going to name them Sally and Sam. And Sally and Sam had been married for a number of years, a very lovely couple. And they retired. They were a professional couple. They've been married some 40 some years. And they retired. They were traveling, their family, very supportive family. And in this process, Sam developed symptoms of dementia. And Sally and Sam just gathered together, they gathered their family together, they decided how that Sam was going to be taken care of and what they were going to do. And so they established the rhythm, and Sam's dementia progressed. And Sally seemed to be doing really well with that until she wasn't. And she called me one day and she said she would like to come visit. And she came in and she said, Rebecca, I can't sleep. I can't eat. I am irritable. I'm upset. I'm drinking too much. I don't know what's going on with me. And I said, well, let's just be curious. Has something happened? And she said, well, I was doing really well and I was accepting that Sam's dementia was progressing until one day when I was changing his brief. And as I was changing his brief, he took his hands and put them on both sides of my face. And he said, I love you. And she said, when he did that, it was such a tender moment. And she said, keeping in mind that Sam hasn't really, I didn't even know if he knew who I was when I was providing his care. And yet I had that tender moment and it meant so much. And then after that, I keep looking for evidence that he was there, that he was, and she said, I can't get over it. It's like Sam died again. and I'm in so much pain and I'm having so much grief. Yet I thought I'd accepted the dementia process. I had accepted having lost Sam, and yet he came back and then he went away again. And that's the nature of the ambiguous loss that's associated with dementia. It's the coming and the going. Research found that the ambiguous nature of the loss related to dementia and personal relationships is one of the most devastating because it remains unclear. The studies have found that the ambiguous loss is one of the most distressful losses because of the uncertainty. And if it's not managed, it can lead to complicated grief, which is far more challenging. So Sally was showing and exhibiting the signs of grief, and she addressed them. She came in and she said, something is different for me now. So Sally was actually reporting symptoms of grief. She was the sleeping disturbance, the eating, the irritability, the tearfulness, the increased alcohol use. So not being certain about the person's absence or presence, no clear demarcation and no clear guidelines makes the ambiguous loss far more challenging. The ambiguity of not knowing the status. Are they there? Are they not there? Are they absent? Are they present? The roller coaster of the losing and then the finding, and the relationship changes. And for example, Sally had thought she had accepted the loss of Sam in the relationship and as she knew him. And yet when he appeared just briefly and for just a second, and then he disappeared, that was devastating for her. And it threw her back into an acute grieving process. Ambiguous, and with the ambiguous loss, there is no official death, there's no wake, there's no funeral. We're left on our own to find a way to understand the loss. There's no rituals marking the loss. There's no comforting rituals that we do for someone that is partially gone. And sometimes the community can't support us, and our friends really sometimes don't understand what we're going through. And families sometimes cannot agree if the person is absent or present. They can't agree if there has been a loss because there's no certified loss. And if there's no clear end in this loss, then no casseroles appear at our door when someone doesn't know our names, when they can't remember who we are. That's a very private loss, that the care partners are left alone to confront what's been lost and what they still have. And they manage this grief alone. And in those private moments, those losses aren't marked. Studies found that the severity of the patient's dementia bore no relationship to the extent of their caregiver's depressive symptoms. I thought that was a very interesting finding. It was the degree which a family caregiver saw or defined the person as absent or present. The more uncertain the status is absent or present, the greater the risk of the depression. Research found that the care partners were more distressed than confronting other suffering ordinary losses, meaning a really clear marked death of a loved one. So it was found that the knowledge of death was more comforting and more welcoming than doubt. So of course, the opposite of ambiguous loss is a defined loss, a clear marked loss. This ambiguous loss, the here, the not here, this confusion freezes the grieving process. Ambiguity can freeze people in place. They can't move forward with their lives, and it feels like a loss, but is it? There's the question. One can go from hope to hopeless and back again, the back and the forth. When the grieving process is frozen, we're exhausted, we're frozen. So when we freeze, we are blocking anything from coming in, whether it's either good or whether it's bad. And freezing takes a lot of energy. So we become exhausted, emotionally drained, emotionally exhausted with trying to make meaning of this situation and try to freezing the process. We don't want to grieve. It's mastering the feelings of the loss. The greater the ambiguity of the loss, the more difficult it is to master, because we can't master something if we don't know it. The lack of mastery creates a greater risk of depression and anxiety. So here again, it's a greater risk for us. The more we feel we're not in control, the more we feel we're on that roller coaster that I spoke about earlier. And it's found that in the very beginning, the hazy beginning stages of dementia, the uncertainty prevents people from adjusting to the ambiguity of the loss. And it's freezing the reorganizing of the changes in the roles and the rules of the relationship. In the relationship in the beginning, we try to keep things the same. We want them to be similar. We're doing things as if they were done just before the onset of the dementia. It may be as something as simple as I'm always the person in the relationship that makes the decisions, and my partner may always refer to me to make decisions, even though I have beginning stages of dementia. I may be expected to do that and not make allowances or make adjustments to the changes. So the relationship is frozen in place. And most importantly, it freezes our grief in place. So the relationship gets frozen, the grief gets frozen. And if I cannot grieve what I can't recognize. So, and if I don't recognize what I've lost. So, and also I don't want to grieve too soon. I don't want to start the grieving process too soon. I'd rather just keep it and stay where the relationship is. And I don't want to write my person off too soon because I don't want to give up. And so I really don't know, are they gone or are they not? And so we're not ready to close the person out in any way psychologically. And so we're hanging on hope that all of this it's going to return. It's not going to be as we think it might be. And at times the care partner can get very little validation about what they're feeling about this loss and this grief, because it can look from the outside if nothing has changed. The person with beginning stages of dementia can present if they're not, as if nothing has changed, that they're not struggling with memory loss. For example, I know many of you in this group today might actually have gone to dinner with your care person, and everybody, it appears very normal. They're talking about the war in Ukraine. And afterwards, people will say, oh no, John and Jane, they did really well. I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing going on there. I think they're just there's no loss there. So it really can feel like others are minimizing our feelings. They're leaving us feeling unheard and unsupported. They can. We can feel like we're going crazy because we don't know, we're really getting confused. And then we can question ourselves. Are we being dramatic? Are we overreacting? Are we making these changes larger than they are? Is there really as sad as we think they are? And we may question our reality. Is he here? Is she here? Is he gone? Is she gone? Frequently, caregivers ask the question to themselves and others. And this is the one that appears in my office often, is that person really, is this really dementia? Or are they just being difficult? Are they just being difficult with me? And I'm seeing this and thinking it's dementia. And so there's all that questioning of the not knowing and the changes. And how do we make meaning of those changes? Yet the ambiguous loss of this person, it goes on and on. The ambiguous loss is, and this is the definition, which also makes it harder, which makes the grief and loss for caregivers more challenging, is that the ambiguous loss is typically a long-term situation that can traumatize and immobilize us. So we move from hope and hopelessness, and we can be just consumed with this uncertainty. And it is a very exhausting process. Those who experience this will come to me and they will say, I am physically and emotionally exhausted with the relentless uncertainty. Is my person absent or are they present? What's my new role here? What's our relationship now? There's conflict of the perception of the loss with the person and with the family. Is my person absent or is my person present? One woman described that she felt as if she was carrying this very large, heavy block in the center of her chest because she felt that she was grieving on a daily basis and that it was always there, regardless of what the day was, that she was carrying this sadness and this grief that she couldn't quite define or understand. There's an old English nursery rhyme that is, and I'd like to share with it. I saw it in my research for the presentation on ambitious loss, and I thought I would share it with you. It was, as I was walking up the stairs, I met a man who was not there. He was not there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away. Now, the nursery rhyme really resonates with me in that I think what applying it to the losses with dementia is that I wish that the stranger that I'm meeting on the stairs would go away. That part of that person that I don't know, that I don't recognize, that is new, it is an altered personality, an altered presentation, and not different cognitions. That's the person I don't want. I want my old person back. I want the person they were before they got sick. So I think that nursery rhyme really resonates with the moments that we really are wishing for it to be as it was before. And we can act if the person, as if the person, we can act if the person, as if the person is gone, or we can deny anything has changed. And with this, we can become immobilized. It can result in depression, anxiety, the numbing response. We can feel guilty, and a whole range of emotions comes up for us that we need to be able to understand and to recognize. We can alternate between hope and hopelessness, the missing, the sighted, the missing again. As in Sam, he was gone and then he came back. My goal today is that if we can give our loss a name and identify it, then it may help us understand the emotional roller coasters that we're on with the grief and loss in our caregiving. We know that some of our emotions are more accessible in our awareness than others. My hope today is that bringing to the front of our minds the awareness of the emotional impact of caregiving, and it enables us to understand what's going on within us. And as in the example of Sally, as she understood what was going on for her, she was able to manage it. Because we are neurologically wired to seek clarity. We crave predictability and consistency in our close relationships. When things are unpredictable, we feel anxious and we can feel depressed and isolated. As humans, we seek connection with others. At times, due to our feelings of grief and loss, we can feel like we're on a journey alone. And this is also a part of the grief and loss, the support that is available to us. Oftentimes, the caregiver will say to me, if only she had cancer, if only she had another disease, we would be sharing this process together. I would not be alone. This would be a sharing journey. And now I'm feeling like I'm in this journey and I'm alone in this journey. So there again is the other emotional roller coaster, the lack of the joining of the other in this journey. The emotion of the anger that comes up for us. And the anger sometimes can be at the limbo that we find ourselves in. There's no end in sight. Remember, the ambiguous loss is ongoing. Then there's really the feeling of guilt for that thought, and that I'm feeling guilty, that I'm angry because I can't see an end here. And then I go back to the hope that the missing parts will return and my life will return and that person will return. And then I have all these conflicting thoughts and feelings regarding that. The caregiver may dread the death, but they also may hope for closure. And to the end of the waiting, of the tensions that this creates for us. And this tension results from conflicting emotions, not wanting death, but just an end to the certainty. And I think that comes up for us oftentimes in this caregiving journey. We're psychologically focused on multiple impulses and feelings and needs, and we are feeling both positive and negative. We're wishing for an end, and we're wishing for it to go on, and we are wishing not to lose our person. We're holding both of these paradoxically. We're holding the hope, and we're hoping, and our hopes are raised, and then they're not, they're lost. We're hoping, we're trying to hold both these. So it really is a roller coaster ride. Along with this ambiguous nature of the disease process of dementia, it can also be accompanied by ambivalence. Now, ambivalence is, by definition, is uncertainty or indecisive about a course of action or a situation. And so there is denial in ambivalence. With the denial, we use denial as a coping strategy. We say, well, because the denial protects us against the harsh realities of a potential loss. We want to accept the status quo. And if we do, it can leave us free of feeling guilt about anything. No one can blame us, and we can say that there's nothing lost. So the ambivalence, we can be ambivalent about, is the person there? Are they not there? Because it's a way of denying the reality. Ambivalence is also used in that it freezes the grief response. So in freezing the grief response, it blocks their ability. It freezes the grief, okay? So we're not feeling it, we're numbing it. But it also blocks our ability to make decisions for change. So that freezing response really immobilizes us. So we can deny it, we can pretend like it's not happening, and we don't make any decisions. For an example of that would be a couple had a solid relationship, and the husband was always the driver. He was the one who would always drive them to the grocery store, to shopping. And he was having more difficulty navigating driving. And yet his wife saw him as a much better driver than she, and she didn't like driving. And she really didn't want to update her driving skills to change that role around. And in doing that, she was supporting the status quo. She didn't want to change the relationship. She was ambivalent. She's like, yeah, I kind of know he's not doing very well, but I think he's doing okay. And so there was no change because the wife wasn't really emotionally ready to change the routine or the rhythm of her relationship, of their relationship. So she maintained the ambivalence about, well, maybe not. So there wasn't any movement, any change. It allowed her to remain up where she was emotionally, which she wasn't really ready to accept that her husband could no longer take her places. The roles were reversing, and her sense of safety and security in the relationship was changing as well. Ambivalence, people can be ambivalent about the test results. So this adds to the ambiguity of the loss and the grief and how we're processing what's happening. Being ambivalent about test results, preferring ambiguity to knowing the future. Often, I hear this often in my office. You hear, I don't want the test. I don't really want to know. And why would someone say, I really don't want to know if I don't want to know if he has dementia? I don't want to know if I have it, because it allows hope. And it also allows us to avoid actually accepting that we have a disease. We don't really want to know. And sometimes the medical experts can't really clearly diagnose. And so and what's going on with us. So in some cases, there's no facts. So if we don't have the facts, and we don't have a clear diagnosis, we can't accept something if we don't have enough facts. So that keeps us in this ambivalent state of the uncertainty. And that too is exhausting emotionally. And we're talking about the psychological impact of dementia on us. and on our families and in our relationships. Ambivalence in the not knowing if we have a disease prevents making a commitments. It can, and which can create feelings, again, if we're not making commitments, if we look on the opposite side of that, it can create feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. And we're in limbo. There's not a lot of power and control in limbo. So to act if nothing has happened can invalidate and separate us from others. So nothing is clear. The emotions remain mixed. And it's really not easy for us to hear. Instead, we prefer the ambivalence to resolutions. So it really separates us, and it can separate us. Loved ones can't make sense of the situation, and they can actually pull emotionally in opposite directions and pull apart during this process. And working with families with unresolved grief in the absence of clarity, and there's the ambiguousness, people will cling to the status quo. Their hope is that the missing will return, and some family members can't give support in this process. And they can't give the support because they can't accept it. And if there's not a certified loss, like death, it's really hard for them to support something ambiguous. So the ambiguity of the loss prevents members from supporting each other as caregivers. And as caregivers, we need the support to reorganize our concept of our family and our roles and our relationships. So we do need everyone to be able to be supportive of this. Families are psychological as well as physical entities. We're not just family members where we have 4 siblings or a mother or father, but we also have a psychological connection. So we must think of the reconstruction of these relationships and our daily lives in a new way. So we're reconstructing roles around this loss and around the ambiguity. Family members that can agree if the person is there or not there. If the family members can agree and the members express their ambivalence, it can cause troubled family relationships. And many of you listening today may have experienced that, where one member of the family says the person is there and the other person and has dementia, and the other person says no. An example of that would be 2 siblings, and they're talking about their mom, and one sibling says, you know, mom can't drive anymore. She can't stay alone, and she's having all these problems. And the other person says, oh no, yes, she can. I saw her. She was doing really well. She drove the other day. She made lunch for me the other day. There's really nothing wrong with mom. She's just older. And then of course the other sibling can say, what? Why don't you get real? Why don't you accept reality? She can't drive. She's not old. She has dementia. So there's the back and the forth, and one person hold one accepting it and the other person not accepting it. One person accepting the absence, the other one is not accepting it. So the perception of not being there is causing conflict. And so how do we affirm, or do we affirm the loss, or do we deny the loss? So this is compounding this problem with dementia as caregiving, and that increases our stress. So we're really caught in this bind. We don't want to grieve too soon if we're caregiving. We would feel guilty if we write the person off too soon. So we really are hungering for some type of certainty in this process. And this is all impacting us psychologically. And because of the mixed emotions, this is oftentimes, because of this mixed emotions, we can hold that person at arm's length. We're anticipating a loss. So we both cling to that person, and then at the same time, we might be pushing that person away. We're putting distance between us because we see that there's going the potential for loss here, and we're losing that person, and we're losing them in daily interactions. So we may be just pushing that person away somewhat. And this may be expressed through anger or irritation. So with that person, so we may resist the leaving, and at the same time, we may want to end. We want to be finished We want to be finished. So we have this back and forth in emotional back and forth. And when sometimes it just feels like, and I've had so oftentimes a person will tell me, oh, these are so many farewells. Each day brings something that I have to let go of, that I have to say goodbye to. And that I feel like there's just multiple goodbyes without anyone physically leaving. So I'm grieving, I'm saying goodbye, I'm processing this on a daily basis. And that makes it so hard. And that's this concept of the emotional roller coaster, the highs and the lows. Ambiguous loss creates role confusion, which plays a big part in the roller coaster of the emotions of caregiving. There is an Alice in Wonderland that's flipped up on the screen, which which I found very descriptive, I think, of what I understand and what I have heard about role confusion for us as care partners. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar to Alice. "I hardly know, sir, just at present," Alice replied sadly. "I knew who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then." And that's from Alice in the Looking Glass. And I think Alice, in this little snippet, I think Alice reflects how oftentimes our sense of ourselves and of the other shifts in the process of the caregiving process. The ambiguity and the uncertainty forces people to question their roles. Are we a couple, even though he has dementia and he doesn't know me? The ambiguous loss blurs the boundaries. For couples, this often causes a partner to question their own intimate relationships. Are we in a relationship? Are we out of a relationship? Am I really married? Am I married? Do I have a husband? Do I have a wife? I don't know my role. And that's just compounding this grief and this loss. I am both angry and I'm sad. I'm angry at the demands of caregiving, because we know caregiving is very demanding physically and emotionally. And I'm really sad because I'm losing my loved one. And I'm sad that I feel as if I've lost the emotional connection. And that emotional connection carries with it in our relationships the ability to have the other experience empathy, to share empathy with us, to share emotional connections, and to be unable to make a connection that creates ambivalence in the best of us. And there is that additional grief and loss. So now remember, all these losses are happening over and over and over again. That's what makes dementia caregiving such a challenge. And the grief and loss in managing that is so challenging. So I'm really hopeful that I've been able to give a better understanding of the psychological impact of the ambiguous loss that accompanies dementia and the caregiving role. So so what are we going to do about it? So I've said, okay, there's grief, there's loss, there's role confusion, there's role changes. It's ongoing. So how can we manage this? How can we manage this? First, I'd like to remind that we're going to talk about coping strategies. So first, I want us to remember that it's the situation and the symptoms are not the person. So this grief and loss it's not the person, it's the situation. And we want to celebrate the part of the loved one that's still present and mourn the part that's lost. So what are some of the things that we're going to do that's important for us to manage the coping of this ongoing grief and this ongoing mourning that doesn't have closure? You can't see the end. So we're overcome the isolation and solitude. So overcome the isolation and solitude of ambiguous loss is the first step to healthy coping. The willingness to compromise and breaking that out, isolation, and allowing flexibility. So we want to break out of the isolation isolation of the numbing, the pretending nothing's wrong. So we want to break out of the isolating ourselves. Communication, we want to communicate. Communication is key in managing the freeze response, because in letting other people know about the disease. So we don't want to freeze. We want to communicate. So we want to be asking for help, because communicating our needs, we want to be able to do that. And also at the same time, when I say that, when we are asking, we need also to make allowances for not getting what we want when we do ask. And that's one of the responses so often I hear is, well, it doesn't matter if I'm asking for what I need. Nobody's listening. There's nobody there for me. And yeah, you may not get what you need in this communication, but yeah, the health is in the asking. It's the breaking the isolation, the communication, the joining. Unfortunately, not everyone understands a caregiver's needs, and they may not understand dementia and the symptoms of dementia. And at times the tendency may feel like that if we are talking about it, that we tend to feel like someone's criticizing us, or that other people withdraw from us when we're reaching out. And this may well be true. Others may not be able to stay present for us because they may be reminded of their own losses and of their own vulnerabilities. And so we need, as we're communicating and we're reaching out, to recognize that this may be happening for the other person and that it isn't about us. We also want to normalize the process. So remember, with dementia, it's a gradual process of letting go. Some aspects are lost forever and others are present, and becoming aware of the difference, allowing a space for both. We want to hold the both and that's the paradox. It's important to understand that it's an active movement. We're holding the both and the and simultaneously. They are here and they're not, and accepting this ebb and flow. And as we're accepting this, we're finding the middle ground. There are no absolutes. There's no absolute thinking. There's no black and white thinking. We want to stay away from black and white thinking. And this allowing the freedom, the movement, the ebb and flow, the holding simultaneously of two opposing thoughts and feelings requires a great deal of energy. And that is exhausting. So we want to be mindful that we're holding really conflicting, paradoxical feelings, thoughts, emotions. We're revising our choices. We know that dementia is an ongoing process, and we know that it's an ongoing process, and so we're going to be revising our choices. We're going to be revising, and then we're going to be revising them again, and this will continue because dementia is a fluid situation, and dementia is a disease of adaptation. So we're always adapting to the changes in the symptoms and the progression of the illness. So we're going to be tweaking our choices as we go along. So these are ways that we can cope with all the coping and the emotional impact of caregiving. So we're going to be revising our choices and how we view things. We're redefining and adjusting the mastery. Remember, we said earlier that when we master something, that makes us feel like we have control. So ambiguous loss can make us feel very incompetent. It can erode our sense of competency and our sense of mastery of order and being able to manage effectively. And so we have these thoughts: we're not doing this right, we're doing this wrong, or we don't have control of this situation. So we really want to be mindful and bring into the front of your mind today that we must give up thinking that we're going to find the perfect solution to care, that less than perfect is going to be acceptable and obtainable, and that to accept that the dementia can't be fixed. We can't fix this. We can't stop the progression as we know it now. We can't do that. So we must hold on, again, the paradox, we must hold on, and simultaneously we must let go. And we want to be letting go of the parts that are no longer there and that we're no longer living with. We really don't want to judge ourselves. We want to have a full range of emotion. The examples of emotions that you're going to have will be anger, denial, sadness, confusion. We feel confused in the ambiguity. And then we want to remember that this confusion, this ambiguity isn't within us. It is not in us. It is not what we're doing or what we're not doing. It is in the situation. The loss, it's an ambiguous loss. It's hard for us to identify. And also remember, there's no right answers. There's an absence of a perfect solution. So we can only select our best possible choices. Another coping strategy would be managing stress with information. So we're going to manage this emotional roller coaster with information. And that is spending time with others in similar situations, getting guidance on how to organize, how to seek information as much as possible about the situation. Education unfreezes the coping process and unfreezes us. It allows us to fully engage in this process. And information is examples of our support groups. I know many of you listening today, most often, or joining today, are in support groups. And this is a great place to give information. And information gives us choices, and it helps us understand what we're going through, and that other people are also experiencing what we thought we were only alone experiencing. It helps us really create a combination of optimism and of realistic thinking, and it allows us to move ahead in spite of the losses. So in education, information, it brings us in, and it helps us, it releases us so that we can move forward. We really don't want to drift through this unchosen life. We didn't choose this process. No one chooses dementia, but we're in this, and we want to make choices, and we don't want to feel like at the end of this that we've just drifted through and we've done our best. We really want to know and make choices and feel like that we have some mastery over what's happening in our lives and to our care partner, our care person. We wanted to manage and determine how we live and how we care for ourselves. We want to take respite. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the page. We want to define our relationship with the person. Now, because the relationship is changing, what's the new relationship mean to us? Because the person, and remember, the ambiguous loss is the loss of the person due to the changes of the cognitive and emotionally, the changes and the difference in the person. So what's the new relationship mean to us? We're in a relationship with someone this isn't the old person, this is the new person. And exploring what the new roles mean to us. In this new relationship, do we set our goals to uphold our sense of ourselves, our faith, our values, our soul? And does it define our sense of purpose? How are we defining our relationship now? And it will mean different things to different people. There's no judgment of self. We can create really no judgment of ourselves, no judgment of others that are going through this process alongside you. Remember, there's no right or wrong way to define and adjust to the meaning of loss. And to help us cope, we can explore the different beliefs and values that we hold, and also allowing that managing this will be different for each person. It can be different for each person in the relationship as the family. It in our care groups, it's really different. Everybody manages it differently. Oftentimes, how we redefine our relationship is influenced by the history of the relationship. what type of relationship existed before the disease. And in that, we would be looking at our attachment styles. We would be looking at our trauma history. We would be thinking of that connection, what sort of relationship we had, what was the previous losses that we had? Did we experience other losses? How we coped with those? Because those all come up for us in this new caregiving role that we have. We don't come into this role without our own personal history. And so I just wanted to mention that, because that the attachment styles, the trauma responses that can get stirred up for us is something that I don't have time to talk about today, but it is really key in understanding our responses to grief and loss and are in the caregiver role. Redefining relationships. There's an example here, and with a wife who was caring for her husband with late stage dementia, and how she redefined her role. She came to see me. She was asking, am I married? Am I not married? And she was struggling with the intimacy, the sexual, the communication in her relationship with her husband. And she was really struggling with what was right for her. And she was trying to define their relationship now as his dementia progressed. And she was struggling with this. And with much thought, she changed her view of the relationship. She said, she came to believe, in her words, I lost my husband, but this person I'm in relationship with now is someone that I care about. The husband that I loved is dead. And now I'm with this person that I care so much about. I want to take good care of them. He's no longer my husband. And she said, my goal is to manage his care and give him the very best care possible. And that's my new role with him. And she took her wedding band off. And then after his death, she came back and she said, I'm putting my wedding band on because now I can grieve. I can grieve for my husband. And that enabled her to manage her situation with less stress. She redefined her relationship with him and her role in that relationship. And that made sense to her. Now, it may not make sense to anyone in this listening today, but in her redefinition of where she was in this relationship, that gave her a sense of peace and acceptance, and it reduced her grief in that moment. And then after he died, then the casseroles appeared at her door and everyone joined her in his death. And prior to that, there was so many losses and grief that she couldn't express. And then when she had the clear-cut loss, then she was able to experience grief and loss as in a very clearly defined way. And so that worked for her. And so we're continuously looking at our relationship, continuous restructuring of family functions and traditions. Now, we're definitely going to be doing that this holiday season because dementia requires us to reconstruct our family roles and our rituals, and reestablishing new rules and rituals. It really can enable us to feel more in charge. So if we're willing to be flexible, we've talked about flexibility, we want to be flexible, and we want to know that it may be different, but it's okay. And that we're allowing this process. It's fluid. We're not going to hold on and get rope burn. We're going to allow the process and we're going to engage in it. We also want to broaden our own identities. And this often happens when someone that we care about, we're in relationship with, and we're the primary care person. We can give up a lot and our life gets smaller. And especially as the dementia progresses, if we're the caregiver, we're giving up a bit more of what we did do than we are, and allowing and being more present for the person with the disease. But even as the ambiguity continues in this process, we want to broaden our own identity. We want to remember who we are and what our interests are. And we want to make sure that we do our self-care. Because if we stay in the old roles that we had in this new caregiving role, if we try to be the person we were before this event changed us, changed our circumstances, changed our relationship, then we get stuck in the past. And you can't stay present and be in the past. So we're reconstructing our concept of who we are. And this really helps us develop tolerance for the ongoing losses and the grief that we experience. So it really strengthens us and enables us to deal with the grief and loss. We want to do the things that really bring us joy, that we're interested in, whether that's taking a trip or taking a new class or making new friends. I have one person that spoke with me, and she said, my husband and I used to do social events all the time. And we did a lot of community events. And now we can no longer do that. And she struggled with allowing herself to go to social events without her husband. And yet when she did, she was able to redefine and broaden her own identity, separate and apart from being that in a couple. So it really helped her manage the grief process, was allowing herself to build a supportive environment around her, and different than being a part of the couple. There is more to you than being a care partner. You have many parts. You're more than just one side. So you want to make sure that you keep and broaden your own identity and your own sense of self throughout this process. We also want to be able to confront change. We want to understand how we're responding to situations. Sometimes something will occur, and we want to be able to pause, take a moment, and think about this. Why am I making this choice? Why am I making this choice? What would happen if I said no? Where am I saying no when I want to say yes? And where am I saying yes when I want to say no? So we're getting very clear about how we're making these choices and asking ourselves important questions as we're doing it. We also want to take respite. And this is the one thing that I think that caregivers struggle so much with, that would really, it's so helpful. Respite is essential, and no one should feel guilty for taking it. And yet it's so hard for many to allow themselves to take the respite from caregiving. The respite is from the presence of the loss. So you need some respite from this ongoing loss that you're living with on a daily basis. And remember earlier, I said that the loss is traumatizing and immobilizing because it's ongoing. And because it's going on and on and on, we must learn to take care of ourselves. And we have to have that respite from the loss. So that's very, very important. We need to transfer situations that won't change, that we can't take care of. We need to know when we need to call in a care person, someone to support our caregiving efforts, whether we need to call in an aide, knowing when that we need to transfer this situation that we can't manage care in the home, and doing it on our own, that it may be time not that we can't do this any longer. So we want to be able to transfer situations that we can no longer manage. And we want to have the wisdom to do this. And that allows us to care for ourselves. We want to be really careful with self-blame. Self-blame is dysfunctional. It prevents us from moving on in our lives. It doesn't benefit anyone. So I would like to encourage you to give yourself grace and self-compassion, because oftentimes we will say things in our head to ourselves that you would never say to anyone in your group here. You wouldn't say, you can hear yourself saying, I'm doing this all wrong. I'm not getting anything right. If you heard someone else say that, you would say, oh, wait, slow that down. You're doing a lot of things right. And you're just having a moment. And that is not who you are. So you would have compassion for the other. So I encourage you to have compassion for yourself. So we do want to give ourselves self-compassion. Understanding that another part of this is also that understanding. So often you hear people say, I really want closure in this grief process. I want off this roller coaster. I just want closure. But we know that not even in death do we have closure. Closure is a term that's most often and most accurately applied to a business deal. The new research on grief is that we have continuing bonds, that the bonds with our loved one continues after death. And so we learn to live with the grief, and we learn to live with loss. And there is no closure. It's not going to just stop, but we need to be able to accept the continuing bonds of the grief process. As going through social work training or therapy training in the old school and the old theory, it was, if you can name something, you can claim it. And if you can claim it, you can change it. So we really want to keep that in mind, because as today, I'm hoping that we're able to name and claim and change our responses to this ongoing grief process so that it doesn't feel so much like the roller coaster is out of control. We want to address our feelings. We want to validate our feelings. We want to label our feelings. We want to give ourselves permission that the feelings, the mixed feelings that we're having back and the forth are present, not present. Under these abnormal circumstances, these are very normal feelings. And that the situation is not our fault. And that we express this full range of emotion. And we want to unfreeze our coping responses. We want to remember to have flexibility and to hold the paradoxical. We want to hold the here, but the not here, the present, but the absence. We want to be here. We want to understand the ambiguity that the dementia and the loss and the progression of the disease brings for us, and not having a clear definition of this loss. I think that an example of Sally, that she felt this incredible grief when she recognized the loss that she was experiencing. She felt the presence and the absence. So, and then she came to understand that she was having this response to this ambiguous loss, that having given, accepted it, and then given it, and come back in the absence, the presence, the reappearance. And so that's the roller coaster. And we want to be prepared for this. We want to be prepared for the emotional roller coaster of caregiving. And we want to understand how this ambiguous loss, this undefined, unclear process, it's not clear cut, it's not defined. We can't mark it. We can't join people. People can't join us for a marked occasion, but it's ongoing, and some of it is private. Some of it, the grief is hard to define. It's hard to share. So we really want to be aware that makes the ambiguous loss, the nature of the loss, makes caregiving so much harder when we're caring for someone and losing someone to dementia. So I'm going to end today. I really hope that some of this will resonate with you. Maybe it will, and maybe it will ease some of the stress that you're having, especially as we face the holidays and we adapt to our present situation and our new roles, new expectations, new rituals, and our new understanding of what's happening for us. So be very willing to invite anyone if they have a question about ambiguous loss and how it's different from other types of loss and why it impacts us so significantly as dementia care providers. So I'm open to that, Melissa.
Yes, Susan. You have a question? I don't know if it's going to let you talk, but you can put something in the Q&A box. So everyone, there's a Q&A box you can click on and put any of your questions in there. When they pop up, I can read them to her and she can answer them. All right, our question is, okay, yes, we will be linking I've recorded this and it will be put up on our website. We're getting lots of thank yous for your presentation. If you're not sure how to ask a question and you want to send something to me via email, I can always send them to her as well and get back to you. That is not a problem. So here's a question for you. Losing my primary person, the person I confided in and rely on for support, it's hard to find replacement for that.
Yes, I understand that. Yeah, and if I understand the question, you're saying that person that was your go-to person, you had that attachment and that safety in the relationship, and you've lost that as your primary person, and your person you've lost. Replacing that, it's going to take time, and you're not going to replace it. It won't be like it was with that person. It'll be different. It can be as good. It will be different, and it will take you time.
So our next question is facilities, where might be a good place for them to go and how do you get them there? And should I encourage friends to call and write to him?
Well, facilities, and there's a large number of facilities in our area. I think you can research that. There's evaluations online. There are geriatric care managers to help you select facilities. I think there's the aging resource that you can refer to. I'm sure Insight has families that have placed good place of information, our support groups that have placed, and they'll give you the inside scoop on the facilities that they're using.
You guys can always reach out to me for that. Feel free.
Yeah, always. And should you encourage people to write? Of course. I mean, it's the writing is coming from a good place, right? If I write and the person can't understand it, but it felt good for me to reach out. So I'd always encourage that. And it's wonderful. I mean, it's good to do that. So yes, I wouldn't just disappear because someone's been diagnosed with dementia. Stay in the process.
And there's a third part to that one. I get angry at the doctors who give no diagnosis and also make no effort to communicate with him.
Understandable. Very appropriate response. Of course, they're not communicating, in that feels really demeaning to your partner, your spouse, your father, mother, whoever this person is that you're talking about. And I know the anger, and it's very valid. And I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. I do know it happens. I think at that point in time, it's oftentimes good for us to speak up in the process and ask for what we need. Again, it doesn't mean the doctor is going to give it to you, but you can say, I really need clarity here. I need a diagnosis. And would you please include my person in the conversation? It's important for both of us to be included in this conversation. And that's using our voice. Doesn't mean that we're going to get what we ask for, but we speak up, and the health is in the speaking.
So I don't see any more questions. I did want to another one just popped in. How do I address people, friends, family, doctors, professionals who speak quality of life and other statements as a way to give up? Also, how do I address questions about family who won't help and cannot get help properly because it reopens frustration?
Okay, slowing that down just a little bit so I can actually hear what we're talking about.
How do I address people who speak quality of life and other statements as a way of giving up?
So your understanding is when they're talking about quality of life, that this person who's writing this, that they're saying that they're giving up their quality of life, that we shouldn't be doing this. We should focus on quality of life.
I'm almost thinking it's saying, she's saying, I want to focus on quality of life, and they think that means she's giving up on trying to do things, treatments or.
Oh, treatments. Yeah. Wow.
Correct me if we're wrong, Michelle.
Yeah. I don't have an actual response for that, everyone has a different view of quality of life. Everyone has a different view of what and of when they want to, what and how they want to proceed with this.
She said you were correct. I was not.
Oh, okay. Okay. What was the second part of the question?
Also, how do I address questions about family who won't help and cannot help properly because it reopens frustration?
That's a tricky one. And that's one that happens really often because we do want to lean on our families and we need their help. And yet sometimes we go to them and ask, and they don't help us in the way that we are expecting. And again, that in an ideal world, we're able to express that. We're saying, you know, when I ask you to take Jim to the doctor and you're not busy, is there a way that we can work that so when I can't take him, that you would be available to take him? How can I work with your schedule? And how can I include you in this process? So you want to do it with an invitation. I need your help. What can you do so that we can work with this together? And really encourage people, but we really have to be very clear and precise about what it is we need them to do. Most often people will say to me, well, you know, everybody says they'll help, just let me know what I need, but that doesn't feel very supportive. So I think we just have to be very clear, and we have to risk, and we have to communicate. Remember, communication is breaking the isolation, and it helps us get support that we need, because none of us can do this by ourselves. This is not a journey that you can walk along by yourself. So we need support.
So Michelle did want you to clarify your first answer. So how do I address people who speak quality of life and other statements as a way to give up?
Well, the focus on quality of life, again, I think that is different for different people. Everyone has their own quality of life. When people talk about quality of life, we have to give them the grace that maybe their intent is to communicate what their quality of life, when they would want to do something differently. There's a beautiful book that's written, it's called When Breath Becomes Air. And it talks about that, the quality of life and how you have those conversations. So if these are family members that are talking about, oh, well, you got to have a quality of life, you should just give up, the person isn't doing this or that, they're not enjoying their life, that differs for everyone. And so we always have to hold that in our understanding of the person that you're talking about. And did you have a conversation prior to the disease process about what quality of life would mean to that person? To me, maybe my quality of life would be, I don't want any advanced treatments if I can't, if I don't know my grandchildren. But for you, your quality of life may be, as long as you're enjoying ice cream and you can recognize that and you can smile, that may be your quality of life. It differs for everyone, and no one should make a blanket statement about when the quality of life no longer has quality, because it's not for us to judge. It's for us to understand and accept and support.
Okay. Our next question is, could you please comment on the grieving process for a loved one who has Alzheimer's with aphasia, particularly in communication with that person?
Well, aphasia is so hard. It is so hard. And that's a challenge, isn't it? Because we so need to have the connection and understanding and I'm not an expert on that. I know there are studies, and there's specialty areas and people who are able to facilitate different methods of communications with aphasia, with someone with aphasia. So I think that we just do the best we can. We read the facial features. Do they communicate? We just do our very, very best. And I know it's frustrating. And again, that's where we give ourselves that we're doing the very best we can do. We're trying our hardest to understand what's going on and what they're communicating. And again, giving ourselves the grace that we're doing the best we can do, and just be persistent, and then try different ways. Maybe talk to special experts who work in that communication. So that would be, I don't know anything. Melissa, you may know more about that than I do.
Let me jump to these other questions and I'll come back to that one. Are there any therapists who specialize in supporting folks with ambiguous loss?
I I sort of do that. That's, I mean, a therapist's ambiguous loss, like I said, is starting to become more in the clinical practices. We're getting more training on ambiguous loss. And this was all spurred on by the pandemic, because that was a type of ambiguous loss. It wasn't clear. There was a lot of ambiguity about it. And so it became more and more, we're becoming more aware of it as a different type of grief process, a different intensity. So many grief bereavement therapists will be talking about ambiguous loss. So yes, you will probably find, if you see someone who specializes in grief, loss, bereavement, you will find people that have training in ambiguous loss.
I observed my loved one with mild dementia has no capacity to commiserate with me and see that I need some time off. I accept that, but is there any possibility of them agreeing to move to assisted living facilities?
So if I'm understanding the question, is the person is saying that their care partner can't understand how exhausted they are. And that's the part of the dementia that makes it so hard, is the lack of empathy. I can't recognize how hard you're working to take care of me. I don't have that capacity. So the person with dementia is showing us empathy. Are they going to recognize it's time to go to an assisted living? I don't know that person will have that insight, the cognitive ability, the ability to know that you're worn out and you could use some respite, and they could, and it's time now that you can't do this anymore. So you're going to transfer that situation. It may be a decision that you have to make based on the relationship prior to the dementia. Like if this person knew and was very protective and supportive of you before and didn't want you to get exhausted, then applying that understanding in this situation based on the past relationship. And that maybe give you enough support to say, okay, if he could understand or she could understand, she would want me to go and allow her some respite and to take this responsibility she can no longer manage. So I think thinking of it in that way might be helpful.
To go back to the aphasia question, so there's a couple options for that. Using picture communication is really key. If people can't use their words, and there's a couple ways you can do that with printing out pictures of common things that they would want to do. The other option would be there's on iOS, there's an app called Simple Talk, and it's for aphasia. And if they have an iPad or a phone, they can pick the button and it will speak for them for the different topics. So those are two options you can utilize for that. We have a comment, doctors look at me like I should give up on my mom. Friends encourage me to put her in a home.
And you're always, people like to have opinions about some other people's lives sometimes. So, you know, being comfortable with your decision, this is your decision, you're going to live with this. And if you want to, you know, if the doctors are looking at you maybe with compassion, that this is a really hard work for you, that it's overwhelming, that maybe you're showing up clinically with a lot of stress, maybe some stress related health issues on your own. They're worried and concerned about you. And sometimes, again, remember, we're revising our choices. So your choice was to care for your mother in the home. And if you can do that, and you're doing it as best you can, and yet you're having some health issues of your own, then you might want to sit and think about, is it time to revise this choice? Does it make sense? Can I manage this without making myself ill? Maybe the physicians are coming from that perspective, in that this is jeopardizing your health. And as far as what other people think, everybody has an opinion about your, you know, most of us have lived long enough to know that everybody has an opinion about your life. And it doesn't really matter, because it is your life. If you want to care for your mother in your home, and that brings you joy and it makes your heart happy, then do it. As long as you're doing it in a way that you're caring for yourself as well.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you all for being here. I did want to just let you know, we're changing up some of our topics next year. So January, we have our first 3 posted online to sign up for. January 11th, it is Lewy, information and support from the Lewy Body Dementia Association. February 8th, resources for aging LGBTQ+, cultural awareness and sensitivity with older adults. And March 8th is Stay Steady. It's about fall prevention. Please do be advised, we're going to start doing in-person presentations. And we'll be doing them hybrid, so they'll both be online and in person, but we want to see your faces. We know you miss socializing and having that camaraderie, so January's will be online completely, but February will be in person at Fairfax, and we will also cast it. It'll be the same thing in March as well, so pay attention when you sign up for which one you're going to choose. But we thank you all for supporting Insight and being here today. This will be recorded and we will have it up on the website within the next week or two. Have a wonderful holiday season, and thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you all. Thank you.